Oh, happy Friday. Excuse me, right out the gate, need some water. So this is exciting. So for the people on YouTube and Facebook, you guys get my virtual background, but for the people on Instagram, you'll get the real key. I got a different background, and it's because this is my first live from my new apartment, my new setup after I moved last month, but it's taken almost 3 weeks to get internet. And as I'm watching the live stream, it looks like it's great, poor connection. This is exactly why I was like, I need to test this out, because not all internet's the same, and streaming is a huge part of my day and going live, so I need to just test this out. But let's see how it goes, because I don't want to spend too much time on today's topic because it's a big one. And I'm just going to try to tackle one aspect of it. Make sure I'm set up here, because I put a main topic of vanity, and then I also put a subtopic of hair. Sorry, my connection is, I hope y'all can see me. I hope it's not skipping, but we're just going to have to try it. We're just going to have to go. So today's topic is we're going to talk about the connection, the relationship between vanity and mental health, but specifically when it comes to hair. Now, I was trying to think of okay, how do I want to talk about this? And it also, I want to make sure that it is appreciative to both genders, or however it is that people identify, because it's not really a gender conversation. It's not a pronoun conversation. It is a self-care conversation. It is, why is it important to consider vanity and the stigmas around vanity to when we are talking about mental health. Excuse me, guys. I'm gonna have to this Wi-Fi. Can someone leave in the comments? Am I skipping? Am I clear? What's my picture like? Because I keep getting a poor connection message, and I don't really know if it's you guys. It's gonna piss me off, honestly. But yeah, if you guys just give me some feedback real quick, because I'm just going to go, and hopefully it will be recording and it will just kind of be inclusive, but I might have to redo this one. We'll see. So let's dive into it. Vanity. What is the concept of vanity? So I love to go to a definition, because I feel like that just kind of grounds us in the conversation. So if you're considering your mental health, men and women, how do you improve? This is a conversation I think a lot of, people will consider. Okay, it is freezing on occasion. Okay. We'll see how this goes moving forward, but yeah. So the definition of vanity: excessive pride in one's appearance or accomplishments, conceit, something about which one is vain or conceited, worthlessness, pointlessness, or futility. Okay. So I'll just be honest. My operating definition was more in the concept of vanity being we literally have structures and furniture called vanities to literally just to look at ourselves. And when we're talking about mental health, I think this becomes an important conversation, because mental health is all about that concept of mirroring, especially with therapy. When you're talking about therapy, it's about, me as a therapist, I'm trained as best as possible, and then I also have to maintain that practice of mirroring, so people have a less biased ability to understand themselves and what goes into that. So when we talk about literally the concept of vanity and where it extends itself into culture and different cultural practices, different different standards, and then within culture, so we've got gender, we have race dynamics, we have different intersections of what self-care looks like. And I chose the topic, we're just going to start with hair, as kind of the opener of this, is that because hair is a whole identity in itself. Let me close some of these tabs, because maybe that will help. That's the benefit or downfall of having attention deficit disorder, is I have literally tabs open on my computer that I do in my mind. So I don't know if that's going to help, or if I'm just really going to have to consider getting better in it, or streaming elsewhere. So So let's talk about hair. So again, I use my story and my journey of hair as the facilitator of this conversation. That's the concept of the vulnerability. So because I am going to walk into a lot of different controversial topics if I talk about someone else's, but I will notice my observations because I have had a lot of different experience. But I will say with my hair, okay, so what you can see here today is pretty natural. Natural color for the most part. I do, highlight, try to bring it up a notch. But for the longest time, my hair was a big source of stress for me. It was a huge source of like anxiety because I always had this like thick but fine hair, like, and it doesn't hold a freaking curl. And everyone, they're like, oh, your hair is so great. And I'm like, no, it's not. And I can't tell you how many women specifically, they're like, oh, your hair looks so great, da, 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 da. And I'm like, I want your hair. I want yours. I want yours. So right there's the tone of comparison right there. And if we've all known the comparison is the thief of joy, I do work with that saying. Oh, I got a little hot. Hold on. I work with that saying quite often, but I don't take it from people because I think comparison is a natural. This is a good look. I got hot. I think the sweater is sorry. This comparison is a natural part of life. It's also part of mirroring, and in therapy and in self-development, we have to be able to process comparison. However, it is one of the most not controversial is not the word that I want to use. It's the most complicated concept to understand as a process that your brain has to go through, and then also learning the redirection process. So when in mental health, kind of what brought me to this particular topic is, I'm going to slow down because this internet connection is making me literally hot because it is pissing me off that I've spent 3 weeks and I am like, I need to regulate my body temperature real quick. Excuse me. This is how we maintain mental health, composure here. So and how this topic ultimately comes up in a lot of my sessions is in stereotypes. And this actually applied to me. So I don't know if y'all have been following me for a while, you have seen my hair has stayed pretty much the same color, the same style. I've had cuts. I went shorter for a while. But my identity prior to me taking my health seriously is that I took a risk with my hair and I went and had an undercut. So ultimately from like my temples, if you don't know what an undercut is, I literally had like a V-shaped, all of this below that line was shaved, and then I kept my hair on top of it. So ultimately when my hair was down, you couldn't tell. And I really enjoyed it, but I was also doing it as a way of control and distraction from myself, from my health. And I'm trying to practice my peace sign over here because this internet is killing me right now. So our hair ultimately becomes our identity. Then if you go into like more of a cultural conversation about that, a black woman or a brown woman or someone with curly hair that has not understood how to maintain their hair, that right there is a huge contribution to a lot of stress and anxiety, and then let alone the social judgment that comes from understanding what a person's hair and trying to conform or just trying to feel comfortable with themselves. So hair is actually a huge conversation when I work with my clients, and what we have to talk about, like, sometimes how long does it take? How much money are you ultimately spending? Because if you're in a different ethnicity group, then that's a whole bill in itself to understand how to have like protective hairs and like hairstyles. So you have to pay someone to be able to do that. Excuse me. So the conversation comes around, it's like one of the biggest barriers for people to understand, like, why aren't they improving with their mental health, is because a lot of the times there comes not only externalized judgment, then we're talking about all the isms, and the reality is that people don't know how to process their own emotions and confusion about trying to understand someone else's reality, and that gets projected upon, let alone like hate. Like that we all know is like, okay, it's bad, but we also know that it's still alive. A lot of the covert hate or comes from the lack of understanding of, just because for me, I don't understand what it's like to maintain curly hair. I found a way to understand it in my journey of like learning myself, because one of my friends had very curly hair, and I watched how she had to go through the cleaning process, the maintenance, how much oil and moisture had to be in there. That's not something I deal with the opposite end of the spectrum. And me understanding, like, because my hair is fine, it's straight and it's oily, that a lot of that was because I was not putting enough moisture in not only my body, but then also I was overusing certain products. I was causing another problem because I was just trying to like do something with my hair. So hair is actually a huge component to mental health. Now I'm going to, this is because it's an easier conversation for me to have because I am a woman. I'm going to switch to the male perspective to as best as my possibility can be, is that men, if you guys have, let's talk about the external judgments and what affects your mental health. And the reason being, it's not because it really kind of cuts you to the core. I'm just going to go ahead and start with this one. It's because you have the tendency that if you don't feel accepted, or if you're not fitting the norm, like you have a receding hairline, you have facial hair is also another identity that men have, that women do struggle with. That's a hormone issue, but it is like, this all affects your identity and ultimately reinforces limitations with accepting self. And when it comes to mental health and to mental illness, and some of the people that I ultimately work with, this has to be a conversation at some point, because our identity of hair is so impactful. It is about our presentation. If we're having a bad hair day, you're going to catch a judgment, like, because it's going to shock someone else to be able to try to understand, like, why does that person look like this? Now, because judgment is natural for every individual, for every human, we're likely to perceive it even more as an incoming message as judgment, but with no reconciliation to the fact that it may be confusion. It may be that someone is fascinated. No one likes to be stared at, though. Come on, I know that feeling. Like, I walk into Walmart and everyone's like staring at me. It makes us feel uncomfortable, especially if we have, insecurities around those things. So I could easily just say this and use less words. It's like, oh, they're insecure, they're dead. But honestly, that is part of the problem, is that we're not opening up what it is that we're talking about. And we're just being like, oh, they're judging me. No, they're making a judgment based off of their internal responses and their experiences to be able to understand. Now, if people don't understand that, we can't get very far. And it's just going to be perceived as like, oh, this person's staring at me, what's wrong with me? Or they're going to get aggressive because they've had an experience being like, why are you staring at me? Right? Like, some people have different responses. So when we look at the concept of hair for people to be able, and why it correlates with their mental health, it is really all about how we perceive ourselves in presentation. That's the most important part, is that, and so there we can get back to self right there, right? So judgments from others, I'm not going to say it's easy to help people understand that that's not about them, but it is. You have to sometimes start there, and then you have to, the hardest one is the judgment of self, because that is ultimately reinforced externally and by experiences, and it's not natural for us to go inward and be like, oh, is this my narrative? Is this my self-judgment that is facilitating an external judgment? And I'm not saying it's just delusional. I'm just saying that it is, you are the common denominator. Your thought process, if it's already predispositioned to have a negative narrative, especially about hair, because of confusion, of no understanding how to manage, or having too much time spent addressing this particular issue, and it can be honestly it's like a cell tower. My job is like figuring out which cell tower the message is coming from, that It could be a self-belief just about not being good enough, a parent's internal transfer of a message about their inability to understand their hair, or just self-worth in general. And hair and identity starts to become like one big mess. Okay. So the biggest limitation I see with people here is just all of the self-judgment that comes with it. Like if you roll back to the beginning of this particular setting, like I am actually, hair for me is a big self-judgment because I sweat a lot. And I'm literally getting hot because the internet delaying was pissing me off. So therefore I'm talking faster. I'm moving a lot more. I'm also standing because I'm in a new setup and I have a standing desk now. But it ultimately, I sweat through my head first. So at this point, y'all can't see it. And I can't see it yet. But if you touch the back of my neck right now, and my hair just absorbs moisture. And then let's go back to college. Let's go back to Sara in college. Whenever I sweat through my head first. So my hair ultimately, being blonde and fine and a little bit darker, now it looks like I just got out of the shower. So ultimately, like anything I do to my hair has to be, it became something that I restricted myself from spending my time doing because I was already anticipating, well, if I sweat, put it up. If I sweat, it's going to get oily, it's going to get dirty. I was over washing it for a long time because having fine hair, it gets oily very quickly. But that's not stuff that y'all can see. And ultimately what was happening for me and what affected my mental health the most was because of this particular insecurity, mostly about sweating, which I have tracked back to no one ever really likes to sweat. It's kind of uncomfortable, right? But I tracked it back to an interaction with a girl in middle school when I was playing sports. So I used to be an athlete. So it's like playing sports is what you do is sweat, but I sweat a lot. So it's like this girl made me feel so insecure. She didn't make me, well, she probably did intentionally. I would say she's like, oh, you can't guard me because you're sweating on me. And at the time, I made the best of it. We were playing basketball at the time. So it was like, you know what? All right, I'll shoot over you. Don't guard me. That's an open access to the game. But what happened was because our brain's natural ability to protect ourselves, it locked me into this insecurity to not addressing my own reaction and my stress response to a belief about my worth because of how much I sweat. Then I can't even get to the hair. I can't even get to any preventative strategies, which I've now kind of worked in, but I'm still learning about it. Like I don't wash my hair every single day now, but I have to make sure that I account for, especially being in the gym as much as I am, like I have to account for wash days when that's planning. It's a lot of work. And if you're still dealing with brain fog from depression, from anxiety, from attention deficit disorder, the hair and identity of hair becomes not only the issue, but also the solution that you can't quite access yet. So I hope this is making sense so far. And I understand, Sara, is it really that deep? Yep, it really is that deep. Because if we don't start to take this seriously, and when I mean take this seriously, I don't mean throw yourselves into a self-care routine. I'm going to talk about that next. I mean, make sure that you evaluate what your relationship with your hair is. Because if you're working on your mental health journey and your health journey at some point, you're going to have to improve that relationship. The same way that you're going to improve the relationship with your spouse or your best friend or your mother. You're going to slowly be doing things on improving the relationship with yourself, and not real big on being able to managing financially, not having huge expenses to be able to take care of yourself, because it's not about how much money you spend on a product. It's not about how much money that you invest for yourself. The investment of time is all. Money wouldn't exist without time. So if we are spending too much time being hyper fixated, that's also going to be an imbalance right there. Some people don't spend enough time. So if I go back to just the gender roles of who I end up working with in this, when it comes to self-care, men are like appreciating of self because they've never really been taught the value of physical self-care, mostly skincare. So if I'm gonna have to give you one tip about how do you improve your mental health, look at your skincare routine. And then I'm gonna go on the other side of the spectrum with women. Women have been reinforced that like you have to take care of yourself because you have to be beautiful. You have to be vain, and if you don't do that, and and that is a problem for some women, is that we become so hyper busy. And myself, this is why I fell in this category, is that we stopped doing things to understand how to feel good about ourselves. And they don't have to be, hour-long skincare routines with a whole bunch of products that you see like on social media. That is actually an underlying issue of you not taking care of yourself if you're stuck in that consumerism of like, oh, this mustache here has to take priority over me eating food or getting sleep. That's a trick. That's a trick. I will be the first person to call my client and be like, it's going to happen sometimes, but it's a trick. It's reinforcing a belief system that is probably not seen by that person to be able to, that is kind of overlooking the source of the anxiety that you're dealing with, the source of being stuck in your own process. And it's really a lot of the times it's comparison. We're set up, our culture is, in our society is completely set up by social media. Like I'm not harping on social media as like it shouldn't exist, because that's actually where I learned a lot of how to take care of myself in a reasonable way. The only reason I think I didn't, I went overboard with it in some regard, but it was because I'm posed with the comparison of people who I'm like, oh, I want that. I want that hair remover, that, at home, remover. But for me, is it like, I could go buy it, I got the money, but is it going to be good for me long term? Is it really that important for me to make that investment? Or is it important for me to look at the longer term goal of making sure that I'm financially free? Because financial correlation with finances is one of the bigger, weights for people that like they stress out about at all time. It's like a running, tab open, like a tab on your computer. So this conversation in general just becomes very complicated and multifaceted in so many ways. But the main components here is look for your self-judgment. If you're judging yourself, focus on that redirection to how you can be more compassionate. Literally reframe and talk it out loud to yourself. I had this conversation with a client of mine yesterday of, you have to know what the root thought is in order to do better with it. So for them, it was like, I'm not going to be a perfect provider, because I work with a lot of healthcare providers. And I was like, well, why aren't you? She's like, well, I'm allowed to make mistakes. And I'm like, okay, so rephrase your sentence. I was like, well, in strive to being a better provider, I'm allowed to make mistakes because that makes me a better provider, to be able to learn from my mistakes. So you actually have to stop, and it takes a short-term investment for a long-term result and reward, to stop and literally reframe your sentences and talk to yourself out loud. If people judge you, let them judge you. They're probably just like, they want to be able to do that themselves, but they just haven't met, the right therapist yet, right? So looking for that self-judgment. Now here in that self-judgment too, is if you already have a skincare routine, if you already have a lot of these things in places, that's great. I would encourage you to look at like, how much time does it actually take you to do that? Because that could be, if you're still struggling with attention deficit disorder, if you're still struggling with anxiety and depression, short term, it feels good, but it may be a control behavior. And what I mean by control behavior is that we influence change in ourselves to try to make us feel better externally, when really the issue is internally, and we're not looking at the emotion of not feeling good enough. And it's just natural to get stuck and distracted with the comparison of what you see in the mirror. This is not just comparison with other people. This is comparison with yourself. Now, how do you work and address this? This is where hopefully like elementary school art class comes in. You have compare, and you also have its match of contrast. So when you're going to look at and you get stuck in comparison, if you can identify that comparison is there, just open it up. Be like, okay, what am I missing here? Contrast. Well, I'm like, oh, they have curly hair. So in order for me to get that, what would I have to do? Well, I could look at a perm. I could look at curling my hair and putting a lot of heat on it, but that's also a lot of time. And that's also a lot of damage to myself. Is that something I'm willing to do? More than likely, it's because we're not finishing our sentences that we get asked for ourselves internally, either because we have external distractions, or it's because we're so used to having half thought processes that we don't actually contrast the whole and actually show ourselves the whole thought process and actually answer the question that we're having. So really, and when I was talking about control, is then we change our hair color. Why my finger disappeared like that? We change our hair color when we influence control externally, on ourselves and for other people. So for other people, it's going to be giving unsolicited advice is usually one of the most common things. They're like, oh, you would look so pretty if you did this. Can we just kind of accept people where they are and then ask them, like, you know what, I know of something that could be a suggestion that would maybe heighten that, and then share it. Because in that statement, you're losing the consent, and you're also potentially promoting someone else's insecurity and not knowing it. And then you feel bad and keep doing it because you never learned the lesson because you were having to deal with the reaction. So when we exhibit control for ourselves, it then in turn, it's not good enough and it will continue to go out and towards other people. Whereas when we do control, it's like we're changing a lot. And that's, look, I'm not going to say that's not a bad thing. You're allowed to change in life. I literally promote change, but you're not changing with true intention to what actually is going to make you feel good sustainably and long term. So change your hair color. I curl my hair, but I can't do it every day because it takes a lot of time that I'm not willing to take away, or I don't really have it right now, given that I just moved and I'm going to have to go spend some time to get better internet now because it's like freezing here or there. But is that because we're not stopping to actually slow the energy source? Why are we moving so fast? Why do we have such high expectations of self and ultimately don't feel good about ourselves? Because we're not regulating. We're not regulated. And so therefore, that's where if you're one of those people who switches it up a whole lot, by all means, that could be just a form of self-expression. But a lot of that could also be what's keeping you stuck and in this state of being where your mental health is not prioritized and ultimately ruining a lot of your relationship with self and your relationship with others. So my last thing, so we went over, judgment of self, expectation of self. If you like what you're doing, that's great. But if you're losing sleep over the fact, like not only just because you're going to bed too late and you're becoming dysregulated because of the expectation that you have to maintain a presentation that makes you feel good and accepted by other people, then you're missing another layer or a level of something that you might want to look at. Comparison, you're going to open it up and you're just going to contrast, like, what do I have to do to actually attain this? And then so the last one is, I think, the stigma of vanity. I grew up not having actually I had a little bit of a balance. I had, my mother who was not super into aesthetics and I don't want to say superficial, but just presentation. And then I also had another mother, my stepmother, who was a little bit more about presentation, just based off of her role. She was in sales, she understood the power of presentation. And now learning myself and trying to find my own balance in my more enlightened state and taking my mental health more seriously, I do understand the form of presentation. Like, I'm not necessarily going to come up here, not because I'm in fear of your judgment, but because of I am more calm, cool, collected when I know that I've spent the time to make sure I'm okay with the effort that I've put in to present myself to other people. Notice this is not about like, oh, you're going to think that I don't take care of myself and I'm not practicing what I preach. I was a therapist before I actually filled in my eyebrows. And a lot of it was so simple, y'all. For me, it was just about, I didn't know makeup. I didn't know how to do my hair. I didn't know that dry shampoo needed to be put on after I blow dried my hair and not the day after to try to prevent oil buildup. Duh. Thank you, Christina, my hairstylist. Like, she dropped that gem and it changed my life. I just didn't, because I was so overwhelmed. It's not only that I didn't know, I couldn't pursue the knowledge because I was stuck. I was stuck in here in self-judgment mode, and I was stuck in not accepting myself because I felt so uncomfortable in my own body. And it had some to do with weight, but now that I am like, yeah, I dropped low in terms of my weight, and I'm gaining a little bit weight back, some of it unintentional, I will say. But a lot of it is really like I start to see whenever I'm shifting in a place that is new, my automatic is that I don't like it, but it's because it's new and I don't understand it. And so I'm like, okay, what is it about my body or my presentation or my hair that I don't understand right now? And so for me, growing my hair back out, a lot of it is accepting the fact that it's not as full down here, and it doesn't have as much pow, like, like this is specific to me. So you really more just prompting you guys is like, what about, because we're constantly changing every single day, which is partly why it's like, yes, you may be dealing with depression and like brain fog, but a lot of it is just having to sit yourself or stand in front of the mirror, and this goes for men too, and understand, where are you at today? Just for today, what are you going to accept about yourself? What are you going to accept and be willing to lean into, learn more about, versus just change and give yourself a completely different environment just in your own body to take in? Because we all know a new environment feels good, but sometimes it's too much. It's just we're not in the right place. So we make changes that are short-term gratifications. You see this a lot with working with addiction. One, just because appearance, drugs and alcohol are just going to literally pull and be so much stress on the body. But even people in early recovery, just having no buffer to their own experience. This is a point for relapse. This is a point where they change their hair a lot because it becomes so overwhelming. And then it becomes their source of insecurity, and they're confused as to how to address their anxiety because it's constant, because they are literally thinking about it all, right? And I did that for a long time, even though I got compliments on my undercut when I made that big change. And then I also dyed my hair darker, which again, not really a big deal, but if it's harboring an insecurity that you're just kind of like putting on face for to make sure that it's not taking energy away from you, you're completely missing how much energy it's actually using. And then it's actually leading to the problem of you having brain fog, not wanting to get up in the morning, not having a healthy relationship with food. Because if I zoom out, hair we lose hair because we have poor nutrient control. Our bodies are dysregulated, and ultimately our hair becomes brittle for women. We're not eating enough, but we're complaining like our hair is the biggest source of insecurity. A lot of it comes back down to your relationship with food. So I got distracted. Thank you, Maisie. Sorry, excuse me, that was Kat. I got distracted from my last point, which is the stigma of vanity. And so if this is where you're at, Maisie, come here. If this is where you're at with like, ooh, vanity, no, that's too self-absorbed. Come here. Thank you. She's saying hi. If you're stuck in the stigmatization of vanity, then that is something, it's just where you start. If it's a lot of the time, it's because we don't understand how to work with what we've got. Never had your eyebrows waxed, which I had bad experiences with eyebrows being waxed, so therefore I don't do it. I invest the time to be able to do that myself. But the biggest stigma, I think, is the difference between being self-absorbed and then self-focused. And when it comes to mental health, we're heading towards self-focus. When it comes to having a lot of personality traits or anxiety, it's absorbing. We're stuck in self-absorption. So the stigma is really one of the biggest, not it's only a barrier, but it's also a solution, is recognizing that sometimes you do have to be a little, intentionally self-absorbed so you can release yourself from the self-sabotage pattern of why you stay stuck in self-absorption. and you can move on to self-focused, because self-focused gives you the freedom to be focused on other things of not just self. Okay, so this is a common misconception. And actually, I was even using this terminology when up until like a year ago, where I was saying like, yeah, being selfish is okay. But I stopped doing it because it was too close to the realization that people stigmatize being selfish, and it keeps people. So I switched it to being self-focused. And it was actually a friend of mine who switched that, influenced that terminology change, because the main point is, and especially I was like, duh, Sarah, because I work with predominant attention deficit disorder people, some anxiety, but that's kind of a byproduct of not being able to focus. Yeah, the solution is being able to focus. So why was that? My language was contradicting the solution that I'm bringing to people. So if you are one of those people who is like, oh no, that's vain, like she's such a vain person, there are some people who are vain and presenting as the self-absorbed. So that's the trick of comparison, is that because you feel like you're not that person, it's easier to judge. But it's also coming from a self-judgment. That's, if you go back to my other one of my other videos about envy versus jealousy, it could be coming from something that you want because you've never had. And I don't mean it's like you want exactly what that person has, but you may want how a better presentation of self and feel better about yourself, and your brain doesn't interpret that. It just is like, want. It's basic. It's literally one of the most inefficient things that our bodies and our brains do, is literally it feel and then not interpret the language of emotional intelligence. And so that's ultimately what I teach people of, like, how do you build that language? I told someone, I think it was yesterday, I was like, you're pretty much like learning Chinese, but for yourself. You have your own language. You have your own, you have to be able to interpret what a jealous response or an emotion of wanting something is not actually that exact thing. It may be in the realm of that. Like, I didn't want necessarily curly hair because that comes with a whole lot of other issues, but I wanted the option to have a curl stay in my hair, because this is its only trick. I didn't even have to blow dry this. I didn't even blow dry it yesterday. I brushed it. I'm like, seriously? It sticks straight. But people literally, they damage themselves to get my hair. And that's the crazy part of my thinking. Notice I didn't call myself crazy, because we don't do that in mental health. My behavior, my thinking was crazy. I was not crazy. I was just misinterpreting the message of my desire. And I was able to find a compromise with myself, because I had worked on my focus. I had worked on being able to regulate and all that. Now, I'm going to stop there. I feel like I want to be proud of myself for getting through this whole, like, I've got one screen that's blinking at me. Your poor connection. It's freezing. And I'm like, I've calmed down. So while I've even stayed, this is what practice looks like, guys. I'm just going to use myself as an example, is that I went from being flustered and sweating because I was stressed and like processing, but I knew I was like, I'm just angry because it's taken me 3 weeks to get this internet and it's still finicky for lives, but I've also in that process calmed down, stopped sweating, back my neck's still a little wet, and it's causing the hair issue and still not in every insecurity is going to go everywhere. And I've been able to slow and regulate while talking. Probably could have done a little bit better, honestly, but can't we all? So I hope that made sense. That's just kind of opening up the first concept of like hair as an identity. It's considerably important when you're working on your mental health to understand your relationship with your hair, because it's the one thing that we all, I think, relate to. And some people have a lot more stress around what it takes to get to a point where their hair is a place where they like. But I will tell you this, like, you don't have to invest a whole lot of money. It's just time. And it doesn't have to be one big chunk of time. It's little by little over, I'd say over the last 3 years, did I really start to understand that my hair was way more manageable, but I just never took the time to be able to learn it. And when you take the time, therapy is that time where you learn about yourself and how though you interact with the world, and you'll slowly start to see that your world view just opens. So I hope that is helpful for something and for someone. And if you have any questions, please make sure you leave a comment. I will get back to you as soon as possible, or DM me. I don't do a whole lot of product recommendations because not everyone, I will but I really don't use a whole lot of product because my hair can't really hold it. But I know people who may have similar situations I can recommend. I will say just kind of skirt this one in here, because and maybe this will be my next vanity and mental health concept, is skincare. I will say, if you are I mentioned a little bit, is that men tend not to have a lot of exposure to skincare, but it's a huge concept when we're talking about improvement of mental health, because it comes under hygiene and general health, because our skin is an organ. So you do, maybe we'll talk about skincare a little bit more intricately next time. But if you have any questions about skincare, if you struggle with skincare, what's out there, please, it's not super complicated. If you just want to, my skincare process is dial soap and exfoliation and a moisturizer. And yes, people are gonna be like, oh, you need to wear sunscreen. Absolutely, I know that. I also work from home. I'm just not there yet. I'm on a growth cycle here. I'm moving up. I have a moisturizer and a sunscreen in my Amazon cart right now. I fully intend to buy, but it's just not been something I've prioritized. And I've also it is something I'm exploring. It's not something that I am diving all into, because I also know that that's a trait of me being stressed, me not looking and taking care of myself in emotional ways, for me to put that much time in things that are not the most important. Presentation is important, but it's not the most important thing. And I have to spread that energy in other places to make sure I can maintain my business, to make sure I can maintain my physical health, making sure I eat and not drink too much caffeine to try to suppress my appetite, because that will affect my skincare. So I hope this kind of, if anything, it influences on holding you accountable to examining your habits and your thoughts and your beliefs about yourself and your hair and how you take care of yourself, because it's all important. All right, I will see you guys next Wednesday, hopefully with a little bit better of a connection, internet-wise. And yeah, you guys have a great weekend. I'll see you later.